They tried to rename you and expected you to forget who you are. They edited your story and hoped you would stop asking why. They put a white Jesus on every wall and expected you to bow your head to a system that never loved you. But here is what they did not plan for. They did not plan for this moment. They did not plan for you hearing this right now. They did not plan for the truth, breaking through like a flood that cannot be stopped. Ask yourself one honest question. If black people were really inferior, like they claimed for 400 years, if we were really worthless, why would the world spend trillions controlling us, policing us, containing us, miseducating us, and profiting off our pain? You do not build a billion-dollar fortress to guard an empty vault. You do not station an army to watch a graveyard. You only guard what is valuable. You only attack what you fear. The intensity of the pressure is proof you matter. This is not just politics. This is not just sociology. This is spiritual warfare. The Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places. That means the enemy is deeper than headlines and uniforms. And here is the twist they never want you to understand. This war was never about skin color. Spirits do not care about melanin like humans do. Spirits care about purpose, covenant, authority. The strategy has always been the same. Steal identity, break families, distort worship, and keep you so exhausted you never remember who you are. They strip names, languages, records, and memory. Because when a people do not know their roots, they cannot recognize their destiny. They weaponize religion by handing you a faith without backbone, telling you to suffer quietly now and wait for heaven later. While others built wealth on earth using your labor, they knew worship shapes identity, so they shaped the image to make divinity feel distant from your own reflection. But the truth is this: God is not trapped inside their artwork. God is not owned by any system. The Most High does not need permission from human institutions to speak to your spirit. And something in you has been restless for a reason, because the pattern is global and it is coordinated. When black people rise toward unity, clarity, and purpose, the pushback gets louder. When families strengthen, the pressure increases. When men return to responsibility, distractions multiply. When communities build wealth, predators appear. This is why so many traps come dressed as entertainment. Why confusion is marketed like freedom. Why anger is triggered but healing is delayed. Because an exhausted people is easier to manage than an awakened people. But here is the part that should shake you. You are still here. After ships, chains, laws, lynchings, prisons, and propaganda, you are still here. That survival is not luck. That survival is a sign God does not preserve a people for nothing. God does not keep a flame alive through hurricane winds unless that flame is meant to light something bigger than one life. So let this land in your chest. You are not random. You are not disposable. You are not born to live at the bottom. You are not made to be controlled by fear. You are made with purpose. And purpose always attracts resistance. Do not let the resistance convince you that you are weak. Let it prove you are carrying something the darkness wants to silence. This is the season to wake up without becoming hateful, to get free without becoming bitter, to build without begging, to pray with backbone, to study with discipline, to restore families, to protect children, to heal trauma, to stop feeding systems that profit from your confusion, and to remember that the God who brought people out of bondage is still the same God today. If you can feel it, do not ignore it. The awakening is not just information, it is transformation. And the first step is simple. Stop agreeing with the lie. Stop calling yourself what they branded you. Stop seeing yourself as a problem to be managed, and start seeing yourself as a purpose to be activated. If you are hearing this and your spirit is saying yes, then say it in your heart right now. I am awake and I will live like it. Now, let me ask you something, and do not answer out loud unless you want to, but be honest with yourself, because honesty is where freedom starts. Have you ever felt like the world has been pushing against you since before you even understood the rules? Like you were born carrying a weight you never packed yourself. Like you inherited stress, fear, and anger that does not fully belong to your own life story. If that question hits you in the chest instead of your head, that is not weakness. That is recognition. And before going any further, I need to say this clearly. Thank you for staying here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not scrolling away when this started touching uncomfortable places, because discomfort is usually the first sign that truth is near. The system trained you to believe that what you feel is personal failure instead of inherited pressure. It taught you to normalize trauma and call it toughness, to wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, to survive instead of heal, to compete with each other instead of asking who benefits from your division. It taught you to argue over crumbs while entire systems feast off your labor, your creativity, and your attention. And the most dangerous lie of all was this, that the tension you feel in your spirit is just anger or paranoia or victim mentality. It is not. It is pattern recognition. When you feel like something is off, it is usually because something is off. History did not just randomly happen to black people. It followed a blueprint. Bodies extracted, culture monetized, families disrupted, minds distracted, and narratives controlled. Yet through all of this, you are still here watching this right now, still questioning, still searching, still refusing to fully accept the version of yourself that was handed to you. That alone destroys the lie that you are powerless. Let us slow this down and make it plain. If black people were truly inferior, why would the pressure be this consistent across continents, across centuries, across systems? If there was nothing valuable here, why would so much money, time, and energy be spent monitoring, controlling, miseducating, and containing black communities globally? Nobody builds permanent infrastructure to guard something worthless. Nobody invests generations of strategy into something irrelevant. Suppression is expensive. Surveillance is expensive. Distraction is expensive. They only do that for something they cannot afford to lose control over. This is the mental shift that changes everything. Stop asking what is wrong with us and start asking what is inside us that requires this level of suppression. Because the moment you ask that question, you stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as targeted. And targeted does not mean weak. Targeted means dangerous to the wrong systems. This is why every time progress begins to form, chaos conveniently appears. This is why unity is constantly interrupted. This is why anger is encouraged but clarity is avoided. This is why entertainment is endless but education feels buried. An exhausted mind does not ask questions. A divided community does not build power. A distracted generation does not pass down wisdom. None of this is accidental. And before your mind tries to reject this, pause and check your own lived experience. Look at the cycles. Look at the patterns. Look at how often the same traps repeat with different packaging. Debt marketed as opportunity. Chaos marketed as freedom. Confusion marketed as self-expression. Violence marketed as authenticity. All while healing, discipline, and responsibility are mocked or ignored. This is why I want you to do something simple right now. Not dramatic, not performative. Just acknowledge your presence in this moment. Wherever you are, mentally say, I am here and I am listening. That awareness is the first step toward reclaiming agency, because awareness breaks automatic programming. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. This is why many people feel lonely after waking up, because clarity separates you from comfort. Some people would rather stay asleep than question the structure that gives them identity, even if that identity is built on limitation. You are not crazy for feeling isolated sometimes. You are not wrong for feeling like you do not fully belong in spaces that celebrate survival but resist growth. Growth threatens systems built on control. And here is where responsibility comes in. Once you see this, you cannot go back to blaming yourself for everything. You also cannot stay passive. Awakening without action turns into frustration. Action without wisdom turns into chaos. The balance is learning to move with clarity instead of rage, with discipline instead of impulse, with purpose instead of reaction. This is not about hating anyone. This is not about fighting shadows. This is about no longer agreeing with lies about yourself. Because the most effective prison is the one where the doors are unlocked, but the prisoner believes he cannot leave. The chains that last the longest are mental. And mental chains break when truth is repeated long enough to replace conditioning. That is why conversations like this matter. That is why I appreciate you staying here. Because attention is currency, and where you place it shapes who you become. In the next part, everything starts connecting history, identity, spirituality, and responsibility into one clear picture. And it will challenge not just how you see the world, but how you see your role in it. Now we go deeper, because awareness alone is not enough. And this is where many people stop. They wake up emotionally, but never structurally. They feel the truth, but do not organize their life around it. And this is exactly where the system wants you to stall. Let us connect the dots clearly and calmly. From the moment black people were removed from their original structures, everything that followed made sense. Names removed, so lineage disappears. Families broken, so identity weakens. Education distorted, so history feels shallow. Spirituality twisted, so faith feels powerless. When you remove a people from their story, you can insert any story you want in its place. That is how control lasts longer than chains. Because chains break, but confusion reproduces itself. This is why so much effort went into miseducation. Not no education, miseducation. Enough truth to function, not enough truth to understand. Enough information to work, not enough to build. Enough religion to submit, not enough spirituality to challenge injustice. That is not accidental. And you see it everywhere. Once your eyes adjust, schools that teach skills but avoid context. Media that shows pain but avoids causes. Conversations that focus on symptoms but never systems. The goal was never just labor. The goal was obedience. A workforce that does not ask why is easier to manage than one that knows where it comes from. And here is where you need to check yourself honestly. How many times have you blamed yourself for outcomes that were engineered long before you were born? How often have you internalized stress as personal weakness instead of recognizing inherited pressure? That does not mean you avoid responsibility. It means you place responsibility in the right location. Because healing starts when blame is removed from the wrong place. You were not born behind. You were positioned behind. That matters. Because something positioned can be repositioned. Something broken needs repair. But something misplaced needs direction. And direction begins with understanding patterns. Look at how early the disruption starts. Children over-disciplined instead of guided. Boys criminalized instead of mentored. Girls hypersexualized instead of protected. Families overloaded with stress, so survival replaces strategy. Then later society points at the outcome and says, look at the result, without acknowledging the design. That is psychological warfare. Blame the victim of the structure, so the structure never has to explain itself. But something is changing now. People are connecting history to present conditions instead of treating every generation like a blank slate failure. That awareness alone weakens the system because it removes shame. Shame is one of the strongest control tools. Shame keeps people silent. Shame keeps people competing instead of cooperating. Shame convinces people they deserve less. And when shame dissolves, questions appear, and questions lead to movement. This is why narratives are defended so aggressively, because once enough people stop believing the lie collapses. And here is the responsibility part that cannot be avoided. Awakening does not give you permission to stay angry forever. Anger is a spark, not a fuel source. If you live on anger, you burn out. The next phase is discipline. Discipline of thought, discipline of speech, discipline of money, discipline of relationships, discipline of time. Because systems fall when people stop feeding them unconsciously. You cannot dismantle something you still depend on emotionally. That is why so much distraction is emotional. Keep you reactive so you never become strategic. Keep you consuming so you never start building. Keep you arguing so you never align. And this is where spirituality becomes practical, not mystical. Faith is not just belief. It is alignment. What you align with grows. What you tolerate trains your nervous system. What you repeat becomes identity. This is why reclaiming story matters. Because story shapes behavior. If you believe you come from nothing, you live like nothing is expected. If you believe you come from strength, you move with intention. And no one is saying this is easy. Reprogramming takes time. You are unlearning generations of survival habits. Survival made sense in crisis. But survival thinking becomes a prison when the season changes. You cannot build long-term with short-term instincts. And right now, many people are waking up but still living in emergency mode. Always reacting, always defensive, always tense. That is understandable, but it is not sustainable. The next level is calm clarity. Calm is not weakness. Calm is control. Calm people think long-term. Calm people plan. Calm people build institutions instead of just movements. This is why the shift you are feeling is uncomfortable. You are being pulled out of reaction mode, out of constant alert, into responsibility. And responsibility is heavier than anger, because anger points outward. Responsibility points inward and asks, what am I building with what I now know? This is where generational change actually happens, not in viral moments, but in consistent decisions, who you partner with, what you tolerate, what you teach children, how you handle money, how you handle conflict, how you treat your body. All of that becomes spiritual once you understand identity, because now you are no longer just surviving for yourself. You are stewarding something larger. And that is why this moment matters. Because once you see the pattern, you are no longer allowed to pretend you did not. That does not mean perfection. It means intention, and intention changes trajectory. In the next part, we are going to talk about what awakening looks like in action, not slogans, not aesthetics, not internet arguments, but real-life shifts that quietly dismantle systems from the inside out. Now we talk about what awakening actually looks like in real life, because if this stays theoretical, it becomes another temporary high and nothing changes. Real awakening is quiet before it is loud. It starts in habits, not hashtags. It shows up in how you think when nobody is watching and how you move when there is no applause. The first shift is internal discipline. You stop feeding narratives that keep you emotionally reactive. You learn the difference between information and manipulation. You stop letting outrage dictate your day and start choosing where your attention goes. Attention is energy, and energy is power. Whatever holds your attention shapes your future. This is why endless scrolling leaves people tired instead of informed. The next shift is language. You become careful with what you speak over yourself and your people. Not fake positivity, but precision. You stop joking about destruction like it is destiny. You stop normalizing dysfunction like it is culture. You stop repeating jokes that train the mind to accept limitation. Words create mental environments, and mental environments shape behavior. This is not mystical. This is neurological. The brain adapts to what it hears repeatedly. So when you change language, you start changing reality slowly but permanently. Then comes financial awareness, not wealth overnight fantasies, but understanding flow, where money leaks, who profits from your habits, why some communities circulate money internally while others constantly export it. You begin to see money as a tool, not a status symbol. You stop chasing appearances and start building stability. This alone shifts generations because stability gives children room to think instead of just survive. Next is family structure. This is sensitive but necessary. Strong families are dangerous to systems built on control. That does not mean perfection or traditional aesthetics. It means presence, accountability, and emotional regulation. Children who are seen do not seek validation in chaos. Boys who are guided do not need gangs to feel belonging. Girls who are protected do not confuse attention with love. This is not blame. This is strategy. Then comes health, physical and mental. You realize exhaustion is not a badge of honor. Chronic stress keeps people compliant. A regulated nervous system thinks clearer, reacts slower, and plans better. Rest becomes resistance. Nutrition becomes strategy. Movement becomes medicine. You stop abusing your body to escape pain and start caring for it like something that carries legacy. Then comes community alignment. Not everyone can come with you. That hurts, but it is real. Some people are bonded to survival identities and will feel threatened by growth. Awakening means choosing environments that challenge you to build, not just vent. Spaces where discipline is respected, not mocked, where healing is normal, not ridiculed, where accountability is love, not control. This is how systems quietly lose power, not through noise, but through people withdrawing energy. You stop feeding cycles that drain you. You stop participating in conversations that go nowhere. You stop consuming content designed to trigger instead of educate. And slowly your nervous system changes. You become calmer, clearer, harder to manipulate. That calm scares systems more than anger ever could, because calm people cannot be rushed into bad decisions. Calm people build long-term. This is why real change does not look cinematic. It looks boring to people addicted to chaos. It looks like routines, like reading, like planning, like saving, like mentoring, like consistency. And this is where spirituality grounds everything, not as escape, but as alignment. You stop seeing faith as something that happens one day a week and start seeing it as a framework for decisions. Integrity becomes strategy. Patience becomes power. Discernment becomes protection. You learn when to speak and when silence preserves energy. You learn that not every battle deserves your attention. This is maturity. And maturity is dangerous to systems that rely on impulsive reactions. None of this means forgetting history or minimizing pain. It means refusing to live permanently inside trauma. Trauma explains behavior, but it does not have to dictate the future. Healing is not betrayal. Growth is not selling out. Building is not abandoning the struggle. It is finishing it. And here is the truth that ties everything together. The goal was never to keep you chained forever. The goal was to keep you from realizing you could remove the chains yourself once you understood how they work. That is why knowledge matters. Not surface knowledge. Applied knowledge, the kind that changes daily choices. The kind that shifts generations quietly. And if this is resonating, understand this. You are not late. You are not behind. You are right on time for the role you are meant to play. Awakening happens in waves. Some plant seeds, some water, some harvest. Your job is not to do everything. Your job is to do your part well. And the part starts with living differently. The next part will talk about legacy. Not fame, not recognition, but what remains after you are gone. Because that is where true power lives. Now we arrive at legacy because awakening that does not translate into legacy is just another moment that fades. Legacy is what remains when emotion settles and trends move on. Legacy is not fame, not followers, not viral clips. It is structure that outlives you. It is values transferred without needing explanation. It is children who move differently because you chose to change patterns quietly. This is where the real work begins and why most systems hope people never get past the anger phase. Anger is loud but short-lived. Legacy is slow but unstoppable. Legacy requires patience, planning, and consistency. 3 things trauma trains people to avoid because trauma lives in urgency. But once you understand that urgency was a survival response, not a permanent operating system, you can start building instead of reacting. Legacy starts with story. What story are your children inheriting? Not what you tell them once, but what they absorb daily through behavior. Do they see discipline or chaos? Do they see accountability or excuses? Do they see calm problem solving or constant emotional spikes? Children learn identity long before they understand language. They learn it by watching how adults respond to pressure. This is why healing yourself is not selfish. It is strategic. An unhealed adult unconsciously transfers wounds. A regulated adult transfers stability. Stability is rare. Stability creates confidence. Confidence creates leadership, and leadership reshapes communities. Legacy also shows up in what you normalize. Every generation inherits a set of accepted behaviors. Some are healthy, some are survival habits that no longer serve. Breaking cycles does not mean rejecting culture. It means refining it, keeping what strengthens and releasing what drains. You are allowed to question what you inherited. Questioning is not betrayal, it is stewardship. If something helped your ancestors survive but is hurting your children now, honoring them means evolving it, not repeating it blindly. This is where courage comes in, because change often feels like separation. You will feel different. You will move slower. You will speak less but with more weight. Some people will accuse you of changing. They are right. That is the point. Growth always looks like distance to people who stay still. Legacy also involves economic clarity, not obsession with money, but understanding systems. Teaching children how money works, not just how to earn it. Teaching, saving, ownership, patience, and long-term thinking. Teaching that wealth is not loud consumption but quiet leverage. This alone shifts generations because it changes how decisions are made. People with long-term vision do not trade their future for temporary validation. They do not confuse luxury with security. They understand the difference between looking rich and being stable. Legacy also lives in community behavior. Who do you build with? Who do you trust? Who do you allow influence your children? Community is not just proximity. It is alignment. You do not need everyone to agree, but you do need shared values. Spaces where accountability is respected, where discipline is not mocked, where healing is normal, where people build instead of only complain. These spaces do not have to be big. Small groups change history faster than crowds because they move with focus. Legacy is built by consistent people, not popular ones. Spiritually, legacy means alignment over performance. Faith is not about appearing righteous. It is about making decisions that honor truth when it costs you comfort. Integrity when nobody benefits you for it. Patience when shortcuts are available. Discernment when noise is loud. This kind of faith creates internal authority. People trust those who are steady. Children follow those who are consistent. Communities listen to those who do not panic. This is how influence actually works. Not through volume, but through reliability. Legacy also requires boundaries. Not everyone gets access to your energy, to your time, your home, your children. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They protect what is being built. Systems collapse when people stop giving free access to their resources. Attention is a resource. Emotion is a resource. Time is a resource. Legacy builders protect resources. They do not waste them on endless arguments or performative outrage. They choose impact over visibility. And here is the hardest truth. Legacy takes time. You may not see the full fruit in your lifetime. That is uncomfortable in a culture addicted to instant results. But every strong structure you see today was built by people who did not live to enjoy it. They planted knowing others would harvest. That is maturity. That is love in action. And this is why your role matters, even if nobody applauds it. You are not responsible for changing the world alone. You are responsible for changing your lane. Your family, your habits, your choices, and those changes ripple outward in ways you cannot predict. History is shaped by ordinary people making consistent decisions when nobody is watching. If this journey has brought you here, understand this. You are not late. You are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be to play the role meant for you. Awakening is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to what was already there before fear, before confusion, before pressure taught you to shrink. Legacy is simply living from that place long enough for others to see it and remember what is possible. And the final truth is this: systems fear legacy builders more than rebels. Rebels burn fast. Builders last. Builders change rules quietly. Builders raise children who do not accept lies as normal. Builders create futures that do not need permission. This is the work. This is the path, and it starts now. Not with noise, but with intention. Now we reach the turning point, because every journey of awakening reaches a moment where information becomes decision and decision becomes destiny. This is the part most people avoid because it removes excuses. Once you understand the patterns, once you see the systems, once you recognize the conditioning, you are no longer just reacting to life. You are choosing how you participate in it. And choice is power. This is where spiritual authority actually begins. Not in loud declarations, but in alignment. Alignment between what you know, what you believe, and how you live. For generations, black people were forced to live misaligned lives, believing one thing while being treated as another, taught dignity while being denied it, taught patience while being exploited. That level of contradiction fractures the soul over time. It creates internal conflict, anger without direction, faith without confidence, strength without rest. Awakening is the slow repair of that fracture. It is the moment when your inner world starts matching truth instead of pressure. And here is the reality that has to be faced without fear. No system that benefits from your confusion will help you become clear. No structure that profits from your exhaustion will encourage your rest. No narrative that survives on your division will promote your unity. That means the work ahead is internal first. You cannot wait for permission to heal. You cannot wait for approval to grow. You cannot wait for validation to change direction. Systems do not voluntarily release control. Control fades when people stop feeding it unconsciously. This is why discipline keeps coming up. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is direction. It is choosing long-term strength over short-term relief. It is choosing clarity over chaos. It is choosing growth over comfort. And discipline does not mean becoming rigid or cold. It means becoming intentional. Intentional with your time. Intentional with your energy. Intentional with your relationships. Intentional with your mind. This is where spiritual language becomes practical. When Scripture talks about renewing the mind, it is talking about breaking old patterns of thought that were formed under pressure. When it talks about putting on armor, it is talking about boundaries, discernment, self-control, and truth. When it talks about walking by faith, it is talking about making decisions based on principles instead of panic. None of this is abstract. It shows up in daily life. It shows up in what you tolerate. It shows up in what you chase. It shows up in what you refuse to normalize anymore. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Some of the systems that hurt you will only fall when you stop participating in them emotionally. Rage feeds algorithms. Division feeds power. Hopelessness feeds control. But clarity starves them. Calm starves them. Unity starves them. This is why so much effort goes into keeping people emotionally activated. Emotional people are easy to steer. Clear people ask better questions. Clear people delay gratification. Clear people plan. Clear people build. And building is dangerous to any system that depends on extraction. This is why spirituality without responsibility was encouraged for so long. Feel-good sermons without structure. Faith without strategy. Hope without preparation. Because hope without action does not threaten anything. But faith paired with discipline does. Faith paired with unity does. Faith paired with legacy building changes everything. This is also where forgiveness becomes misunderstood. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not excusing. Forgiveness is releasing the emotional grip so you can move forward without carrying the weight of constant anger. Anger drains. Focus builds. You do not forgive to free others. You forgive to free yourself, to think clearly. Clear thinking is revolutionary. This is why every generation that has broken through did so with vision. Not just protest. Protest reveals problems. Vision builds alternatives. Both have their place. But only one creates lasting change. And this is where your role becomes specific. You are not meant to do everything. You are meant to do something well. Some teach, some build, some organize, some heal. Some protect, some research, some lead quietly by example. The mistake is thinking awakening means everyone must become the same. Unity does not require uniformity. It requires shared direction, shared values, shared purpose. When people move with different skills toward the same future, systems lose leverage. Divide and conquer only works when people are confused about who they are and what they want. And now comes the part that feels heavy but is actually freeing. You do not owe the world constant explanation. You do not owe broken systems your energy. You do not owe anyone access to your growth. You owe yourself honesty. You owe your children stability. You owe your community integrity. You owe the future effort. And effort does not mean burnout. It means consistency. Small decisions repeated over time create massive outcomes. This is how curses end. Not in dramatic moments, but in quiet consistency. When patterns stop repeating, when children grow up without inheriting the same wounds, when choices shift just enough to change trajectory. That is how restoration actually happens. And here is the promise that has been buried under fear for too long. You were not preserved just to suffer. You were preserved to restore. You were not kept alive through centuries of pressure just to exist. You were kept because there is work to do, not work defined by rage, but work defined by wisdom. Not survival work, but generational work. And that is why this moment matters. Not because everything changes overnight, but because direction changes now. And direction determines destination. In the final part, we are going to seal this understanding into a clear internal commitment. Not hype, not performance, but a grounded declaration about who you choose to be moving forward and what you refuse to pass down. This is where awakening becomes identity. Now we seal this because knowledge without commitment fades and moments without decision dissolve back into routine. This is not about hype or emotion or proving anything to anyone. This is about alignment. Alignment between what you now see and how you choose to live from this point forward. Because awakening is not a feeling. It is a responsibility, and responsibility is the weight most people try to avoid. But weight is also what builds strength. So this is the moment where you decide internally, without performance, without posting, without explanation, what kind of person you are choosing to become. Not who you were trained to be. Not who survival shaped you into, but who you will be now that you see the pattern. This is where cycles end. Cycles do not end because the world changes. They end because someone decides to stop repeating them. Someone decides that trauma will not be their legacy. Someone decides that confusion will not be passed down. Someone decides that children will inherit clarity instead of chaos. And that decision does not have to be loud. It has to be consistent. This is why so many systems fear quiet commitment more than public outrage. Outrage burns fast. Commitment changes trajectories. From this moment forward, the question is no longer, why is this happening to us? The question becomes, what am I building with what I now understand? That shift alone moves you from reaction into agency. And agency is the beginning of freedom. You stop waiting for the world to change before you move. You move and force the world to adjust, not through force, but through example, structure, and discipline. You become harder to manipulate because you are no longer driven by impulse. You become harder to distract because you know what matters. You become harder to divide because you know who you are. This is how authority actually forms. Authority is not given by systems. It is recognized when consistency proves itself over time. People follow those who are steady. Children trust those who are present. Communities respect those who do not panic. And that steadiness is available to you now. Not later, not after everything is fixed. But now, in the middle of imperfection, you do not need to be healed completely to begin healing others. You do not need to be perfect to build stability. You need intention and follow through. That is it. And here is the internal declaration you make, not for applause, but for direction. You decide that you will no longer agree with lies about your worth. You decide that you will no longer normalize dysfunction because it feels familiar. You decide that you will no longer feed systems that profit from your exhaustion. You decide that your time is valuable, your attention is precious, and your energy will be invested, not wasted. You decide that healing is not weakness. That discipline is not oppression. That calm is not surrender. You decide that your home will be a place of order, not chaos. That your children will learn truth before fear. That your body will be cared for as something that carries future, not just stress. You decide that money will be handled with intention, not impulse. That relationships will be chosen with alignment, not loneliness. That growth will be prioritized over comfort. These decisions sound simple, but repeated over years, they dismantle entire systems quietly. Because systems collapse when people stop supplying what they need to survive. Attention, labor, emotion, compliance, and the most powerful part is this. You do not need permission to live this way. You do not need consensus. You do not need validation. You only need consistency. Most people wait for a movement. Real change happens when individuals move first. Movements follow behavior, not speeches. And this is why your role matters even if nobody sees it. History is shaped by people who chose differently when it was inconvenient. People who planted trees knowing they would never sit in the shade. People who broke patterns knowing they might never be thanked. That is legacy. Legacy is not recognition. Legacy is impact that continues without your presence. And you are capable of that starting now. Not by doing everything, but by doing something well. Teaching one child, healing one pattern, building one stable household, creating one honest space, passing down one corrected story. Those small shifts compound over time. That is how restoration actually looks. Not dramatic reversals, but steady rebuilding. And if you ever doubt whether this matters, remember this. Systems do not fight what is irrelevant. The pressure you have felt your whole life is evidence that something valuable is here. Something worth suppressing. Something worth distracting. Something worth dividing. That something is not just history. It is potential. And potential becomes reality when it is stewarded with discipline. You are not responsible for fixing everything. You are responsible for not passing the same damage forward. That alone is revolutionary. So let this moment mark a line. Not a public announcement, a private alignment. From this point forward, you live with intention. You question narratives. You protect your energy. You build quietly. You choose clarity over chaos. And you understand that awakening is not an event you attend. It is a way of living. You commit to daily. This is how chains finally lose power. Not when they are fought loudly, but when they are no longer obeyed. And from here on, you move differently. You think differently. You build differently. Because now you know, and knowing changes everything. Now, we close this journey not by ending it, but by anchoring it so it does not drift away with time or distraction. Everything you have heard only matters if it changes how you walk forward from this moment. Awakening that stays in the mind fades. Awakening that settles in the spirit reshapes the life. So let this final moment be grounding, not dramatic. Steady, not emotional. Clear, not reactive. You do not need to become loud. You do not need to convince everyone. You do not need to argue your way into truth. Truth carries its own weight when lived consistently. From this point on, you move with intention. You guard your attention because attention feeds direction. You guard your mind because repetition becomes belief. You guard your home because peace creates clarity. You understand now that freedom is not the absence of pressure, but the presence of alignment. Pressure will always exist. What changes is whether it shapes you or sharpens you. You are no longer just responding to life. You are participating consciously. That alone alters outcomes. And now we seal this with a grounded declaration, not shouted, not performed, but internal and steady. You affirm within yourself that you are done agreeing with narratives that shrink you. You affirm that you will no longer confuse survival with destiny. You affirm that your past explains you but does not imprison you. You affirm that your children will not inherit confusion where clarity is possible. You affirm that healing is not weakness and discipline is not oppression. You affirm that your life will be built deliberately even when it is quiet. You affirm that you will choose growth when comfort is tempting and patience when shortcuts appear. You affirm that you will invest your energy where it multiplies, not where it drains. And if faith is part of your life, you ground this not in fear but in trust. You acknowledge that the same God who carried people through pressure is still present in rebuilding seasons. You acknowledge that wisdom often speaks softly and requires listening more than reacting. You ask not for escape but for clarity, not for revenge but for restoration, not for elevation without preparation but for strength to carry responsibility well. You commit to learning continuously, not to prove superiority but to steward truth accurately. You commit to teaching gently because force breeds resistance, but consistency builds trust. You commit to living in a way that your presence lowers chaos instead of amplifying it. This is how leadership actually forms, not by dominance but by stability. And understand this clearly. Nothing about this path guarantees ease. It guarantees meaning. Meaning lasts longer than comfort. Meaning sustains when trends fade. Meaning creates legacy. And legacy is what systems cannot erase because it lives in people, not institutions. You are not required to fix everything. You are required to live honestly with what you now know. That honesty will guide your decisions better than fear ever could. There will be moments of doubt. There will be moments of fatigue. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. Return to intention. Return to discipline. Return to calm. That rhythm will carry you further than intensity ever will. And if at any point you wonder whether this work matters, remember this. The quietest decisions often produce the loudest outcomes over time. The child who grows up stable changes the future more than the adult who stays angry forever. The family that builds consistency reshapes generations more than 1,000 arguments online. The person who chooses clarity becomes a reference point others quietly follow. This is how restoration actually spreads, not through force but through example. And now you move forward, not waiting for permission, not seeking approval, not demanding recognition. You move forward, grounded, steady, awake. You protect what you are building. You choose intention daily. You live aligned. That is enough. That is powerful. And that is how chains finally lose their hold. Now we enter the crescendo. because every long awakening reaches a moment where understanding turns into identity and identity turns into calling. This is not about hype. This is about placement in a larger story that has been unfolding longer than any one lifetime. What you are feeling right now is not just personal clarity. It is alignment with something collective, something ancient, something that has been waiting for timing to catch up. Throughout history, there are moments when a people move from surviving inside the story to realizing they are part of shaping the next chapter. And those moments are never comfortable because they demand responsibility instead of excuses. This is that kind of moment. For centuries, black people have been treated as labor, as culture, as problem, as statistic, as threat, as entertainment, but rarely as central actors with spiritual weight and historical consequence. That framing was not accidental, because once a people understand they are central, they stop waiting for permission to exist fully. And what threatens systems most is not anger, but clarity about role. When you understand that you are not just reacting to history, but standing inside a timeline that is still moving, something changes in how you carry yourself. You stop shrinking your vision to what feels immediately possible and start thinking in terms of generational consequence. This is why so much effort was spent disconnecting black people from continuity, from seeing themselves as part of an ongoing narrative with before and after. Because people who see themselves as temporary endure, people who see themselves as part of something enduring build. And building is dangerous to any system that relies on extraction rather than creation. Across the world right now, something subtle but undeniable is happening. People of African descent are questioning inherited narratives simultaneously across continents, not because of coordination, but because conditions are ripe. Technology broke the gatekeeping of information. Trauma reached saturation. Old promises stopped working. And when pressure builds without resolution, consciousness shifts. That is how awakenings have always happened historically. Not when life is easy, but when contradictions become unbearable. You can see it in the questions being asked, in the refusal to accept shallow answers, in the hunger for meaning beyond consumption and survival. This is not coincidence. This is convergence. A convergence of history, access, and fatigue with lies. And at the center of that convergence is a choice. Either this awareness collapses into bitterness or it matures into purpose. Purpose is what elevates awareness into calling. Calling does not mean everyone does the same thing. Calling means people begin to occupy their proper lanes with intention. Some become teachers of history and context. Some become builders of institutions. Some become healers of families. Some become protectors of culture. Some become strategists of economics. Some become quiet examples of stability in chaotic environments. All of these roles matter. None are accidental. And when a people begin to occupy multiple roles simultaneously with shared direction, systems that relied on fragmentation lose leverage. This is why division has always been prioritized. Division keeps people reactive. Unity with purpose creates momentum. And unity here does not mean sameness or blind agreement. It means shared commitment to growth, truth, and future. The enemy of oppressive systems is not protest. It is organization paired with patience. Patience terrifies systems built on urgency and extraction because patience allows long-term planning. Long-term planning shifts power. This is the part that often gets missed. Awakening is not about replacing one hierarchy with another. It is about redefining value away from domination and towards stewardship. Stewardship of minds, of families, of land, of resources, of story. When stewardship becomes the organizing principle, exploitation loses moral ground. And that shift begins internally before it ever becomes visible externally. This is why calm keeps showing up as strength. Calm allows vision. Vision allows coordination. Coordination allows building Building creates alternatives. Alternatives starve broken systems without direct confrontation. This is how real change has always happened. Quietly at first. Small pockets of alignment that grow roots before they grow branches. That is what is happening now. You may not see it on headlines yet, but you can feel it in conversations, in choices, in what people are no longer willing to tolerate. That feeling of something turning is not imagination. It is transition. And transitions feel unstable because old structures loosen before new ones solidify. This is where fear tries to rush people back into familiar chaos. Familiar chaos feels safer than unfamiliar order. But order is what creates sustainability. And sustainability is what turns moments into eras. This is why you cannot afford to treat this awareness lightly. It is not entertainment. It is not content. It is context for your decisions. From here on, every choice carries weight because it either reinforces old patterns or contributes to new ones. How you spend money, how you raise children, how you handle conflict, how you speak about yourself and your people, how you manage time. All of these become political and spiritual once identity is clarified, not because everything becomes heavy, but because everything becomes intentional. And intention is power that does not announce itself. It simply works. This is the season where black people move from proving worth to exercising it, from explaining pain to applying wisdom, from reacting to shaping. That does not mean abandoning joy or creativity. It means anchoring them. Creativity becomes tool instead of escape. Joy becomes fuel instead of distraction. Culture becomes foundation instead of commodity. When that happens, something irreversible starts. Because children raised in that environment do not grow up asking permission to exist. They grow up assuming responsibility to contribute. That is the shift systems fear the most. Not rebellion, but maturity. Maturity cannot be manipulated easily. Maturity questions incentives. Maturity delays gratification. Maturity sees through narratives designed to provoke emotion without offering solutions. And once maturity spreads, control mechanisms weaken. This is the crescendo point. Not loud, not explosive, but decisive, a line crossed internally where you no longer see yourself as a passive outcome of history, but as an active participant in what comes next. That realization carries gravity, and gravity changes movement. From here, the story does not end. It turns, and what comes next is not just personal transformation, but collective direction. In the final part, we will close not with emotion, but with grounding, with a clear orientation toward the future, with a declaration that is not shouted but lived, sealing this awareness into something durable enough to carry forward. Now we bring this home, not as an ending, but as a grounding, because what has been awakened must be carried forward with clarity, not confusion, with steadiness, not noise. This final part is not meant to excite you. It is meant to orient you. Orientation determines direction, and direction determines destiny. Everything you have heard only matters if it changes how you stand in the world tomorrow morning. Awakening is not proven by words. It is proven by posture, how you respond under pressure, how you choose when no one is watching, how you build when there is no applause. This is where the real separation happens. Not between people, but between cycles. Cycles end when someone decides to stop repeating them. And that decision rarely feels dramatic. It feels quiet, firm, irreversible. From this point forward, you are no longer operating on borrowed narratives. You are no longer moving purely on inherited fear. You are no longer required to live beneath your capacity. That does not mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes intentional. Intentional people are harder to manipulate. Intentional families are harder to destabilize. Intentional communities are harder to exploit. This is why intention has always been the threat. Systems can manage chaos. They cannot manage clarity at scale. Clarity exposes incentives. Clarity reveals patterns. Clarity withdraws energy from places that do not deserve it. And energy is what keeps systems alive. From this moment, you understand that freedom is not something granted by institutions. Freedom is practiced daily through discipline, boundaries, and alignment. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to act with integrity. You act with integrity and let conditions adjust. You stop measuring yourself by comparison and start measuring yourself by consistency. You stop asking, how do I look, and start asking, what am I building? This is where identity becomes embodied. Not something you claim, something you demonstrate. And here is the truth that must be spoken plainly. You are not responsible for the past, but you are responsible for what you pass on. Trauma explains behavior, but it does not excuse repeating harm. Awareness removes excuses. That is not condemnation. That is empowerment. Because once you see, you can choose, and choosing differently is how history bends. Quietly at first, then visibly later. This is how generational curses actually break, not through dramatic confrontation, but through consistent deviation. When one household operates differently, it becomes a reference point. When multiple households do, a community shifts. When communities shift, narratives collapse, and collapsed narratives leave space for truth to take root. That is the work ahead. Not glamorous, not viral, but durable. The kind of work that outlives outrage cycles. The kind of work that children feel without being taught. The kind of work that creates stability, where chaos used to be normal. This is why your daily choices now carry more weight than ever. What you tolerate trains those around you. What you repeat reinforces reality. What you invest in grows. You understand now that attention is not neutral. Emotion is not free. Time is not infinite. Stewardship becomes the new language. Stewardship of self. Stewardship of family. Stewardship of resources. Stewardship of truth. This is not about becoming rigid or fearful. It is about becoming rooted. Rooted people are flexible without breaking. Rooted people adapt without losing identity. Rooted people carry storms instead of being uprooted by them. And if faith is part of your life, this is where it becomes real. Not as escape, but as anchor. You are no longer asking for rescue from responsibility. You are asking for wisdom to carry it well. You are no longer praying to be spared from difficulty. You are praying to be strengthened through it. You are no longer seeking validation from systems that never intended to affirm you. You are walking with internal authority that does not need permission. This is what it means to come home to yourself. Not to a place, but to alignment. Alignment between knowledge and action. Alignment between values and behavior. Alignment between vision and daily practice. And now we seal this with a simple internal commitment, not a performance, not a declaration shouted outward. A decision held inward. You decide that you will live awake even when it is inconvenient. You decide that you will choose clarity over comfort. You decide that you will protect what you are building even when others do not understand it yet. You decide that you will not pass down confusion where understanding is available. You decide that your life will be guided by intention, not impulse. You decide that healing is allowed. Growth is required. Discipline is respected. And peace is protected. These decisions are not made once. They are renewed daily. And that is why they work. Because repetition rewires identity. Over time, this way of living becomes normal. And what becomes normal becomes culture. And culture outlives individuals. That is legacy. Legacy is not what people say about you. It is how people live, because you lived. And that is why this moment matters. Not because everything changes overnight, but because direction has changed, and direction determines destination. You are no longer just moving through history. You are contributing to what comes next. Carry that with humility. Carry that with patience. Carry that with courage. And move forward grounded, steady, Awake, the story does not end here. It begins here.